I never thought I'd be the kind of person to believe in things I can't explain. I'm practical. I double-check locks. I read reviews before buying anything. I trust my instincts. But that November weekend alone in the Henderson house made me question everything I thought I knew about what's possible. The Hendersons had hired me through an agency live-in nanny for their 8-month-old daughter, Emma. They were kind people, maybe a little formal, the type who kept their Victorian home in pristine condition with fresh flowers in every room and no shoes past the entryway. The house itself was beautiful in that unsettling way old houses can be. All high ceilings and original woodwork and rooms that seemed to stretch darker than they should. When they left Friday afternoon for a conference in Seattle, Mrs. Henderson gave me a long list of instructions, most of which I already knew. She hesitated at the door, her hand on the frame, and said, "Emma's been sleeping better lately. The monitor sometimes picks up interference, so don't worry if you hear static." It felt like an odd thing to specify, but I nodded. Friday night was uneventful. Emma went down at 7, barely fussed, and I spent the evening reading in the living room with the baby monitor on the coffee table beside me. The video monitor was one of those high-end models with night vision and a split screen showing 2 angles of the nursery. I could see Emma's crib clearly, her small shape under the blanket rising and falling with each breath. Around 11, I went to bed in the guest room down the hall from the nursery. Saturday night was when it started. I'd stayed up later than I meant to, watching some forgettable crime show on TV, the volume low. It was just past 1 a.m. when I heard Emma fussing through the monitor, not crying, just those restless sounds babies make when they're shifting in their sleep. I muted the TV and picked up the video monitor, expecting to see her rolling over or kicking off her blanket. Instead, she was sitting up in the crib, her back to the camera, staring at the corner of the room near the closet. Kids do that sometimes. They wake up confused, look around, but something about the way she sat so still made me uneasy. Then I heard it. A soft, rhythmic breathing through the monitor speaker. It wasn't Emma's. Hers was light, quick, the way babies breathe. This was deeper, slower, deliberate. It sounded close to the microphone, like someone was standing right next to the camera mounted on the wall. My skin went cold. I turned the volume up. The breathing continued, steady and wet, like someone exhaling through their nose after a long run. I didn't think. I just ran. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my phone clutched in one hand, and burst into the nursery, flipping on the overhead light. Emma startled and looked at me, her eyes wide. The room was empty. The window was locked from the inside, the latch visibly turned. I checked the closet, yanked open the door, nothing but folded blankets and storage bins. I looked under the crib, behind the rocking chair. There was nowhere for someone to hide. Emma started to cry, reaching for me, and I picked her up, her small body warm against my chest. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I carried her downstairs with me, the monitor in my other hand, and sat on the couch trying to rationalize what I'd heard. Interference. It had to be. A neighbor's baby monitor on the same frequency, or maybe the heater kicking on and creating some kind of echo through the vents. I Googled it on my phone, found forums full of parents complaining about similar issues. I convinced myself that's all it was. Emma fell back asleep in my arms, and I eventually laid her in the portable bassinet the Hendersons kept in the living room. I wasn't taking her back upstairs. For the next hour, I kept the monitor on, watching the empty nursery on the screen. Nothing moved. The breathing had stopped. I started to relax, even laughed a little at myself for overreacting. But at 2:47 a.m., I glanced at the monitor again and froze. A shadow moved across the screen, behind where the crib sat, too tall and too defined to be a trick of the light. It moved slowly, from left to right, and then paused near the closet. The breathing started again, louder this time, closer to the camera. I watched the lens fog slightly with each exhale, condensation forming in a small circle at the edge of the frame. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I told the dispatcher someone was in the house, in the nursery, and gave her the address. She told me to stay calm, to lock myself in a room, that officers were on the way. I scooped Emma out of the bassinet and ran to the master bedroom, locking the door behind me and shoving a chair under the handle. I sat on the floor with Emma in my lap, staring at the door, listening for footsteps. The house was silent except for the distant hum of the refrigerator downstairs. The police arrived 20 minutes later, though it felt like hours. 2 officers searched the entire house, every closet, every room, the basement, the attic. They checked the windows and doors. Everything was locked. No signs of forced entry, no one hiding, nothing disturbed. One of the officers asked if I'd been drinking. I told him to check the monitor, to look at the footage. He ejected the SD card from the camera and examined it on his laptop in the kitchen. His expression changed. He called his partner over, and they spoke in low voices I couldn't quite hear. When he came back to me, he said there were 3 hours of footage missing from that night, from midnight to 3 a.m. The files were corrupted, replaced with static. He asked if I'd tampered with the camera. I hadn't touched it. They filed a report and told me to call if anything else happened. After they left, I didn't sleep. I kept Emma with me in the master bedroom, the door locked, a lamp on. When the Hendersons returned Sunday afternoon, I told them everything. Mr. Henderson looked uncomfortable, like I'd accused him of something. But Mrs. Henderson's face went pale. She sat down at the kitchen table and admitted something she'd been avoiding. Their previous nanny, a woman named Laura, who'd worked for them for 2 years, had quit suddenly 6 weeks earlier. She wouldn't say why at first, but eventually told Mrs. Henderson the truth. She'd been woken up at 3 a.m. one night by the baby monitor. Someone was whispering her name through the speaker, over and over. She'd been alone in the house with Emma. The Hendersons convinced themselves it was a prank, maybe someone hacking the monitor remotely. They'd changed the password, reset the camera. Laura still quit. She refused to come back. I packed my things that afternoon. Mrs. Henderson tried to convince me to stay, offered me more money, said they'd install new cameras, change all the locks, but I knew what I'd heard, what I'd seen. I gave them the name of another nanny from the agency and left. I still think about Emma sometimes, wonder if she's okay. I hope whatever was in that house wanted me gone, not her. I hope it got what it wanted. But late at night, when I'm alone, I still hear that breathing in my head, slow and wet and patient, waiting for me to look away. I never considered myself paranoid, but working downtown teaches you to be aware. You learn which streets to avoid after dark, which subway exits attract the wrong kind of attention, how to walk with your keys between your fingers just in case. The parking garage under my office building was supposed to be safe, well-lit, security cameras on every level, key card access only. I parked there 5 days a week for 2 years without incident. That Thursday in late October changed everything. I'm a paralegal at a mid-sized firm on the 14th floor, and most days I'm out by 6. But we had a major filing due Friday morning, and I stayed late to finalize exhibits and proofread motions. By the time I finished, it was past 8. The office was empty except for one senior partner still on a conference call behind a closed door. I grabbed my coat, swiped my key card at the elevator, and headed down to the garage. The elevator opened onto P4, the 4th level down, where I'd parked that morning. It was nearly empty now, just a handful of cars scattered across the expanse of concrete. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly, the way they do in old buildings, casting uneven shadows between the support pillars. My car was parked near the far wall, about 100 feet from the elevator. I started walking, my heels clicking loudly against the concrete, echoing in the low-ceilinged space. Halfway there, I noticed a woman standing next to a silver sedan about 30 feet to my left. She was dressed in business clothes, dark slacks, a blazer, heels, and she was holding her phone, looking down at it with a frustrated expression. As I got closer, she looked up and called out to me. "Excuse me, do you have jumper cables?" Her voice was polite, a little embarrassed. "My car won't start, and my phone just died." It seemed like normal bad luck. I've been in that situation before. I told her I'd check my trunk, though I wasn't sure if I had cables. But as I continued toward my car, something about the interaction felt off. I couldn't place it at first. Then I glanced back at her, and I saw her sedan's headlights were on. Not the interior lights, not the hazards, the full headlights, bright and steady. If her battery was dead, the lights shouldn't be working. My stomach tightened. I slowed my pace, pretending to fumble with my keys, and glanced back again. She was following me now, walking at the same speed I was, maybe 20 feet behind. Her expression had changed. The frustration was gone. Her face was blank, neutral, her eyes fixed on me. I sped up. So did she. My heart started hammering in my chest. I was maybe 30 feet from my car now. I pulled my keys out and hit the unlock button, the lights flashing once. I could hear her footsteps behind me, faster now, deliberate. I broke into a jog, reached my car, yanked the door open, and threw myself inside, slamming the lock button as soon as the door closed. A second later, she was at my window. She pressed her face against the glass, her nose and forehead flattening against it, her breath fogging the surface. She was smiling, not a normal smile, too wide, too still, her eyes unblinking. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, staring at me, her hands pressed flat against the window. I started the engine, my hands shaking so badly I almost couldn't get the key to turn. I threw the car into reverse and backed out fast, my tires squealing against the concrete. I nearly clipped a support pillar as I swung around toward the exit ramp. I looked in the rearview mirror. She was still standing next to my empty parking spot, her arms at her sides now, watching me drive away. She didn't move. She didn't follow. She just watched. I drove up the ramp to P3, then P2, my breath coming in short gasps. When I reached the ground-level exit, I stopped at the security booth and told the guard what had happened. He looked concerned, but not particularly surprised, like this wasn't the first weird story he'd heard. He radioed someone and told me to wait. I pulled into a visitor spot near the booth and sat there with my engine running, watching the entrance to the down ramp in my mirror. 10 minutes later, a building security supervisor came out and took my statement. I described the woman mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, business clothes, no distinguishing marks I could remember except for that smile. He wrote it all down and said they'd check the cameras. An hour later, while I was sitting at home with every light on and my door double locked, I got a call from the security supervisor. He said they'd reviewed the footage. The woman I described had been in the garage for over 3 hours, loitering on different levels, approaching at least 7 different people with the same story about jumper cables and a dead phone. Most people ignored her or walked away quickly. One man stopped to help, and she'd followed him to his car before he got inside and drove off. When security finally went down to P5 to confront her, she ran into the stairwell and disappeared. They searched every level. She was gone. But then he told me something that made my blood run cold. They'd found her car, not the silver sedan she'd been standing next to, but a different car entirely. A black Honda Civic parked on P3. The driver's side door was unlocked. The trunk was open. Inside were zip ties, a roll of duct tape, a taser still in its packaging, and a folded painter's tarp with dark stains that looked too much like dried blood. There was also a notebook filled with handwritten notes, license plate numbers, descriptions of cars, times, and dates. The police were called immediately. I gave a formal statement to the police that night. They pulled clearer images from the garage cameras and ran them through facial recognition. The woman had used a fake name on her parking pass, paid cash for a week's access. The credit card she used to register online was stolen. They canvassed nearby garages and lots, checked with other buildings in the area. 2 other people came forward with similar stories being approached by a woman matching her description in parking garages downtown over the past month. The police told me I was lucky. If I'd opened my trunk, if I'd hesitated a moment longer, if I'd let her get close enough to use that taser, I might not have made it out. They never found her. I don't park in that garage anymore. I pay 3 times as much to park in a surface lot 2 blocks away, the kind with an attendant in a booth and floodlights, bright enough to see every corner. My coworkers think I'm being ridiculous, wasting money over one bad experience. But I still think about her face pressed against my window, that unblinking smile, the way she didn't flinch or look away even as I backed up and drove off. I think about the tarp in her trunk, the zip ties, the notebook full of names and plates. I think about how many times she'd done this before, how many people she'd approached, how many might have said yes. And I wonder if she's still out there, in some other garage in some other city, standing next to a car with its headlights on, waiting for someone who won't notice the small details that don't add up. I hope no one else is as close as I was. My wife Sarah and I bought our house in Boulder 3 years ago, a charming 2-story craftsman with a walkout basement we converted into a rental unit. The mortgage was steeper than we'd anticipated, So we started listing the basement on Airbnb to help cover the payments. It worked well. We'd host software consultants, visiting professors, tourists, hiking the Flatirons. Most guests were polite and invisible, checked in, did their thing, checked out. We barely interacted beyond a friendly greeting and handing over the keys. That changed last April when a man named David Chen sent us a booking request. His profile looked normal. Verified ID, a photo that showed a smiling Asian man in his 30s wearing glasses, a handful of positive reviews from previous hosts praising his cleanliness and quiet demeanor. He said he was in town for a week-long tech conference at the university, needed a place close to campus. We accepted. He checked in on a Sunday afternoon, arriving in an Uber with one rolling suitcase and a laptop bag. He was polite, soft-spoken, barely made eye contact. Sarah showed him the basement entrance, explained the Wi-Fi password and the house rules. He thanked her and disappeared downstairs. We didn't see him Monday or most of Tuesday. Tuesday night, I woke up at 2 a.m. to Sarah shaking my shoulder. She was sitting up in bed, staring at the dark hallway outside our bedroom door. "I heard something," she whispered. "Someone's in the kitchen." I listened. At first, nothing. Then I heard it footsteps, soft and deliberate, moving across the hardwood floor above the basement. Our kitchen. I assumed David had come upstairs by mistake, maybe confused in the dark, looking for a glass of water. We had an internal door connecting the basement to the main house, though we usually kept it locked from our side. I told Sarah I'd check it out. I went downstairs quietly, feeling ridiculous for being nervous in my own house. The internal door at the bottom of our staircase was closed but unlocked. I opened it and looked down the short hallway leading to the basement unit. The door to David's space was shut, no light coming from underneath. I knocked softly. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Nothing. After a long moment, I unlocked the basement door with the spare key and looked inside. David was there, asleep in the bed, his laptop on the nightstand, his suitcase in the corner. He looked exactly as he should a guest, sleeping, undisturbed. I felt like an idiot. I locked the door and went back upstairs, telling Sarah it must have been the house settling, or maybe a branch scraping the window. She didn't look convinced, but we went back to sleep. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. After Sarah left for work, I checked our security camera footage. We'd installed a camera in the kitchen 6 months earlier after a break-in scare in the neighborhood. It was mounted above the sink, angled to cover the room. I pulled up the footage from Tuesday night and scrolled to 1:47 a.m. My stomach dropped. Someone was in our kitchen. But it wasn't David. It was a woman. She was in her mid-30s, maybe, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. She moved slowly, methodically, opening drawers and looking through the mail we'd left on the counter. She picked up a few envelopes, held them to the light, then set them down. She opened the cabinet where we kept our keys and looked inside, then closed it. For 11 minutes, she stood in our kitchen, occasionally glancing toward the hallway where our bedroom was. She never took anything. She just looked. Then she walked calmly to the front door, unlocked it from the inside somehow, without triggering the alarm we thought we'd set, and left. The footage timestamp read 1:58 a.m. I called Sarah immediately, then the police. When the officers arrived, I showed them the footage. They asked where our guest was. I told them he was at his conference. They asked for his information, and I pulled up the Airbnb listing. One officer radioed in David Chen's name and ID number from the verified profile. A few minutes later, the officer's expression changed. He told me the real David Chen, the man in the profile photo, had reported his identity stolen 2 months earlier. Someone had used his information to create fake accounts across multiple platforms. The man staying in our basement wasn't David Chen. We went down to the basement unit together. David, or whoever he was, had left for the day, his belongings still inside. The officers searched the space. In the closet, they found women's clothing that didn't match what a male consultant would bring. On the desk, there was a second phone plugged into the charger, a cheap burner with no lock screen. The call log showed dozens of outgoing calls to a single number. In the nightstand drawer, they found a notebook. It was filled with addresses, names, schedules. Our address was on the second page, along with notes about our routines when we left for work, when we came home, what kind of car we drove. There were 6 other addresses listed, all in Boulder and Denver. The handwriting didn't match the sticky notes David had left thanking us for the coffee filters. The police immediately ran the fake David's photo through their system, but the man who checked in didn't match anyone in the database. While we waited, one of the officers checked our front door. There were scratches around the lock, fresh ones, like someone had been practicing with a tension wrench. He checked our bedroom door next, more scratches on the frame, subtle but visible in the right light. Someone had tried to get into our bedroom while we slept. They'd tried the lock, tested it, but hadn't forced it. Not yet. A neighbor's doorbell camera picked up footage from early Wednesday morning, around 6 a.m. It showed 2 people leaving our house together through the front door, the man we knew as David and the woman from our kitchen. They got into a silver Camry parked down the street and drove away. By the time police arrived Wednesday afternoon, they were long gone. The burner phone was wiped. The notebook was entered into evidence, but the other addresses listed were Airbnbs they'd already checked out of days earlier. The police told us they'd been running the same scam across Colorado and Wyoming for months, booking Airbnbs under stolen identities, using the homes as bases to surveil the owners and neighbors, copying keys, gathering information. In 2 cases, the homes had been burglarized weeks after the guests checked out. In 1 case, the homeowners had been followed. We stopped hosting Airbnbs immediately. We changed all the locks, installed 3 more cameras, got a security system that couldn't be disarmed from the inside. But the damage was done. For weeks, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house made me sit up in bed, heart racing, listening for footsteps. I kept thinking about the scratches on our bedroom door, the way that woman had stood in our kitchen in the middle of the night, looking toward where we slept. I thought about the notebook, the meticulous notes about our lives, the way they'd planned it all so carefully. The police told us we were lucky we'd woken up at the right time, checked the cameras, caught it before they escalated. But I don't feel lucky. I feel like we let predators into our home, gave them keys, trusted a system that failed us. They're still out there. The police never caught them. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if they're in someone else's house right now, standing in the dark, writing down names and schedules, waiting for the right moment to come back. I worked the overnight shift at a Wendy's just off Interstate 40 inches rural Tennessee, the kind of place where you're the only business for 10 miles in either direction and your customers are either truckers or people too tired to realize they should have stopped somewhere better. My shift ran midnight to 6 a.m., and most nights it was just me and one manager, Carl, a 50-year-old former line cook who spent most of his time in the back doing inventory or napping in the office. I handled the register, the drive-thru, and the grill. Some nights, we'd get a dozen cars total. Other nights, none. It was boring, lonely work, but it paid better than day shifts, and I didn't mind the quiet. The drive-thru headset was ancient, one of those clunky models that crackles constantly from interference. We were close enough to the interstate that CB radio chatter bled through sometimes, and occasionally you'd pick up fragments of cell phone calls or trucker conversations. You learned to ignore it, to recognize the difference between static and an actual customer at the speaker. That Saturday night in February started like any other. A few cars between midnight and 2, nothing unusual. Around 3 a.m., a dark blue sedan pulled up to the speaker. I gave my standard greeting, "Welcome to Wendy's, order when you're ready," and a man's voice came through, calm and clear, ordering a number 5 combo with a Coke. I confirmed it, told him the total, and asked him to pull around. But before he pulled forward, I heard him say something else. His voice was quieter, like he'd turned his head away from the speaker, talking to someone else in the car. "She sounds young." The words came through clearly, despite the static. I felt a small chill run down my back, but I shook it off. Customers said weird things all the time, made jokes to their passengers. None of it meant anything. I watched the monitor showing the drive-thru camera as the car pulled around to the window. It was an older sedan, dark blue, with tinted windows dark enough that I couldn't see inside. The driver's side window rolled down halfway. A man in his 40s, maybe, with thinning hair and a blank expression. He handed me a $20 bill without looking at me, took his change and food, and drove off without a word. The next 20 minutes were dead quiet. I cleaned the grill, restocked napkins, refilled the soda machine. Then, at 3:24 a.m., The headset crackled. I looked at the drive-through camera monitor. No car at the speaker. Just an empty lane under the dim yellow menu lights. But I heard something through the static, a voice, low and distorted, like someone speaking from far away. I couldn't make out the words at first. I adjusted the headset, turned up the volume. Then I heard it clearly. It was the same man's voice from before, but now it was barely a whisper. Is she alone in there? My blood went cold. I stared at the monitor. Still no car. I checked the other camera feeds: parking lot, front entrance, side exit. Nothing. No cars, no people. I pulled off the headset and walked quickly to the back, where Carl was leaning against a pallet of frozen fries, scrolling through his phone. I told him what I'd heard. He looked annoyed, like I was interrupting something important, but he followed me back to the front. We both stared at the monitor. The parking lot was empty except for my car near the side door. Then Carl pointed at the edge of the frame. There, just outside the reach of the overhead lights, was a dark blue sedan. Engine off, headlights off. I couldn't see anyone inside. Carl told me to stay inside, and he walked out the front door toward the car. The moment he stepped onto the pavement, the sedan's engine started. It peeled out of the lot, tires screeching, and sped onto the on-ramp toward the interstate. Carl came back inside, breathing hard, and told me to call the police. I did. The dispatcher said she'd send a unit, but it would take 20 minutes, maybe longer. We were the only business out here, and the nearest town was 12 miles east. Carl locked the front doors and turned off the open sign. We stood behind the counter, watching the cameras, not saying much. I kept the headset off. I didn't want to hear anything else. At 3:51 a.m., the headset crackled again, even though it was sitting on the counter. I stared at it. Carl picked it up and held it to his ear, then handed it to me. I put it on, my hands shaking. There was a voice coming through, but it wasn't the man this time. It was a woman, panicked and breathless. He's coming back. Don't let him in. Then static. I ripped the headset off and looked at Carl. He'd gone pale. We checked the cameras. Nothing. But 2 minutes later, at 3:53 a.m., headlights appeared at the edge of the lot. The blue sedan rolled in slowly, almost coasting, and stopped at the drive-through speaker. The engine was running. No one got out. The voice came through the speaker, the man again, calm and cold. I know you called someone. The car sat there, idling, for what felt like an eternity but was probably 2 minutes. Then it reversed, slowly, turned, and drove back onto the interstate. Carl and I didn't move. We stood there, staring at the monitor, waiting. The police finally arrived at 4:30 a.m., one patrol car with 2 officers who looked barely older than me. We showed them the camera footage, told them everything. They took notes, searched the area, found nothing. No car, no sign of anyone. They said they'd file a report and increase patrols on this stretch of highway. One officer asked if we'd seen the license plate. We hadn't. The cameras weren't high resolution enough to pick it up in the dark. I worked the rest of my shift in a daze, jumping at every sound, checking the cameras obsessively. When my replacement arrived at 6, I told her to be careful and left. I didn't sleep that day. A week later, I heard from another overnight worker at a Denny's about 40 miles west on I-40. She said a man in a dark blue sedan had called the restaurant at 2 a.m., asking strange questions. Was she working alone? When did her shift end? Did the doors lock automatically? He'd shown up in the parking lot 20 minutes later and sat there for over an hour before the police arrived. The highway patrol flagged the vehicle description, older blue sedan, tinted windows, but no arrests were made. No one ever found the car. I quit 3 days after that. Carl tried to convince me to stay, said I was overreacting, that it was probably just some creep trying to scare me. But I knew what I'd heard. I knew he'd come back, and I knew that if the police had taken any longer, if Carl hadn't walked outside when he did, that man would have tried to come inside. I still think about the woman's voice on the headset, the one that warned us he was coming back. I don't know who she was. I don't know how her voice came through. But I'm grateful she did. I hope she's okay, wherever she is. And I hope no one else has to hear that man's voice through their headset, asking if they're alone. My older brother Jake and I inherited 20 acres of mixed woodland in northern Wisconsin from our grandfather 5 years ago. It's dense forest, mostly oak and pine, with a creek running through the western edge and a few clearings where deer like to bed down. We'd both grown up hunting with our grandfather, and keeping the land felt like honoring his memory. Every fall, we'd come up from Milwaukee for bow season, set up a small camp, and spend a week in the woods. We weren't serious trophy hunters. It was more about the tradition, the quiet, the time away from everything. But we took it seriously enough to scout properly, to learn the land, to set up trail cameras in early autumn to track deer movement before the season opened. That September, we installed 4 Browning trail cameras at different locations across the property. One near the creek, one along the main trail that cut through the center of the land, one on the eastern boundary near the old logging road, and one overlooking a clearing on the north side. The cameras were motion-activated, set to take a photo every time something triggered the sensor. We checked them every 2 weeks, swapping out SD cards and reviewing the photos on Jake's laptop. The first batch, collected in late September, was exactly what we expected: dozens of photos of deer at different times of day. A few raccoons, a coyote passing through at dawn, some turkeys scratching near the creek. Normal, the second batch, collected in mid-October, was different. The first 3 cameras showed the usual wildlife activity, but the fourth camera, the one positioned on the trail near the eastern property line, had something we couldn't explain. Mixed in with the deer and raccoon photos were over 60 images of a person. A person standing completely still, facing the camera, in the exact same spot on the trail. The photos were time-stamped across 5 consecutive nights, always between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. The figure was wearing dark clothing, a hoodie or jacket with the hood pulled up, and their face was obscured by shadows. But what made my skin crawl was how still they were. One photo at 2:14 a.m., another at 2:19 a.m., another at 2:23 a.m. The figure hadn't moved more than a few inches. They were just standing there, staring at the camera. Jake and I sat in his living room, scrolling through the photos on his laptop, trying to make sense of it. At first, we thought it might be a trespasser, someone scouting the land to poach deer. It happened sometimes in rural areas. People would cross property lines at night, looking for easy targets. But something about these photos felt wrong. The person never moved deeper into the woods. They never looked away from the camera. They just stood there, night after night, for hours at a time. In one photo, their hands were visible at their sides, pale and motionless. In another, their head was tilted slightly, like they were listening. We decided to report it to the county sheriff. The sheriff's deputy we spoke to, a middle-aged man named Kowalski, seemed more concerned than we expected. He said they'd increase patrols near our property and advised us to post more no trespassing signs along the boundaries. He also suggested we install additional cameras to get a better angle, maybe catch the person entering or leaving the property. We agreed. That weekend, we drove back up to the land and installed 2 more cameras at different positions along the eastern trail, both angled to capture wider views. We also moved the original camera slightly, hiding it better in the brush. We didn't tell anyone where the new cameras were. If this person was watching us, we wanted the element of surprise. 2 weeks later, we returned to check the cameras. The original camera was destroyed. Someone had smashed it with a rock, the casing cracked open, the lens shattered. The SD card was missing, but the 2 new cameras we'd hidden had captured something worse. The first new camera, mounted about 30 feet north of the original position, had over 40 photos of the same figure. But now they were closer, standing just 15 feet from the lens, staring directly into it. Their face was still obscured, but I could see more details now. They were tall, maybe 6 feet, with broad shoulders. Their clothing was dirty, streaked with mud or something darker. In one photo, their hands were raised slightly, as if they were reaching toward the camera. The second new camera, positioned on the opposite side of the trail, showed the same figure approaching from a different angle. But in one photo, time-stamped at 3:12 a.m., the figure was holding something. It took me a moment to realize what it was. A printout. A printed copy of one of the original trail camera photos, the one showing them standing on the trail. They were holding it up to the camera, showing it to us. They knew we'd seen them. They wanted us to know they knew. Jake and I sat in his truck, parked at the edge of the property, staring at the photos on his phone. Neither of us said anything for a long time. Finally, Jake said we should sell the land. I told him no. I was angry. This was our land, our grandfather's land. I wasn't going to let some psychopath scare us off. We called Deputy Kowalski and showed him the new photos. He looked genuinely disturbed. He said he'd talk to the neighboring landowners, see if anyone had seen anything unusual. The property to the east of ours belonged to a man no one in town knew much about, a recluse who'd bought the land years ago and rarely left. Kowalski said he'd pay him a visit. Instead of waiting, I decided to set up one more camera. This time, I hid it in a hollowed-out tree trunk about 50 feet from where the figure had been standing, camouflaged with moss and bark. The camera had a live feed feature. It could send motion-triggered alerts and stream video directly to my phone via a cellular connection. I didn't tell Jake. I didn't want him to worry. 3 days later, at 3:47 a.m., I got a motion alert on my phone. I was in bed in Milwaukee, half asleep, but the buzz of my phone jolted me awake. I opened the app. The live feed loaded slowly, the image grainy in the darkness. Then I saw them. The figure was there, walking slowly down the trail toward the hidden camera. They moved deliberately, carefully, like they were searching for something. They stopped about 20 feet from the tree trunk, tilted their head, and stood completely still. For 4 minutes, they didn't move. They just stood there, facing the direction of the camera, as if they could sense it. Then they started walking again, directly toward the tree. My heart was pounding. They stopped 5 feet away, crouched down, and looked straight into the lens. I couldn't see their face clearly, but I saw their eyes pale, unblinking, reflecting the faint infrared light from the camera. Then they reached up, and the feed went black. The next morning, Jake and I drove up with Deputy Kowalski. We went straight to the tree. The camera was gone. Someone had ripped it out of the hollow, snapped the mounting bracket, and taken the whole unit. There were deep gouge marks in the bark, like they'd used a tool or their bare hands. Kowalski found boot prints in the soft dirt near the trail, leading east toward the property line. We followed them for about 100 yards until they reached a barbed wire fence marking the boundary. On the other side, the prints disappeared into thick underbrush. Kowalski said the land beyond belonged to the reclusive neighbor. He told us not to cross the fence, that he'd handle it. We never went back. Kowalski visited the neighbor's property later that week, but the man refused to let him search without a warrant. There wasn't enough evidence to get one, no proof the figure in the photos was the neighbor, no stolen property recovered, no direct threat. Kowalski told us to stay off the land for a while, let things cool down. Jake and I talked about selling, but the market was bad, and no one wanted to buy. 20 acres of dense forest with a creepy story attached. So the land just sits there now, empty, untouched. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. A month after we stopped going up there, I started getting motion alerts again on my phone. From cameras that no longer existed, alerts from the app showing connectivity errors, but the notifications kept coming 3 a.m., 4 a.m., always in the dead of night. I deleted the app. The alerts stopped. But sometimes, late at night, I still open my phone and check, half expecting to see another one. And I think about that figure, standing on our trail, holding up that photo, staring into the camera with those pale, unblinking eyes. I think about what they wanted, why they kept coming back, and what they're doing now. I hope they're gone. I hope they found whatever they were looking for and moved on. But deep down, I don't think they did. I think they're still out there, standing in the dark, waiting for someone else to show up with a camera. And I think they'll keep waiting, patient and still, until someone does.